Welcome to Salem Grace. Hope you guys caught all that information. We're trying something new, playing a little with the videos, and hopefully that soaked in. So glad you're here. Thanks for being at church. I am so excited about being here this morning. I love being at church, and I love this place. I love coming every week. I love that I love this family of believers, and I love that the family of believers keeps growing, and in a lot of different ways. And some of you guys are doing your part to make sure that our attendance is growing, and you're inviting your friends, and others are just having babies. So that's good. But we had a new one this week, and there he is, Lane Chase Wilkins. He was the son of Adam. He is the son of Adam and Jill Wilkins, and he was born August 14th. He weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and 20 inches long, and he is a beautiful little baby. So wanted to recognize that this morning, and love the fact that our church continues to grow. And I tell you, I just love being here every week. I know last Sunday, Pastor Mark preached. Not last week, but the week before last, Cheryl and I had an opportunity. We were gone all week to San Antonio, Texas, and Lexi Crawford, who lived with us for a while, graduated from the Air Force, and that was just a really cool experience. I've never had an opportunity to do that, and our men and women that are in service of our country, I just welled up with pride. And we had an opportunity and to go down there and see her graduate. It was really cool. And on the way back, what I really specifically enjoyed was the 16-hour drive down. Really a lot of good memories there. There and coming back. But I did bank some points coming back from San Antonio, and I stopped at the Magnolia Market for my wife. Yay! All the women are like, yes! I love Chip and JoJo! But for some of you are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There's a show called Fixer Upper, and they have this thing, but it's changed my wife's life, and it's been amazing. So I banked some points there coming back, so that was a good thing, and we had a good time. But it's always good to be back at home. And the thing about a drive like that is I absolutely hate to stop. Any guys here? Just yes, thank you. I see those hands. Yes, I see that hand. But yeah, I am the same way. Like I get in, like we have to time bathroom breaks with gas. I'm like, she's like, I gotta pee. I'm like, I'm sorry, you got 3/4 of tank, babe. You're gonna have to suck it up. You think I'm joking? Like if I could pull up alongside a tanker truck and just refuel, I can't believe we can't do that yet. I would totally just do that because I absolutely hate to stop. I hate to, because I'm like, we're wasting time, we're burning, we could be there, and I just love to just get where I'm going. We would just pee in a bottle and go, but that's been done before too. But I just don't like to stop. I hate to stop when I'm driving like that. It just seems pointless to me. But then, I have that aspect of my life in my driving, but there are other things in my life that, I really, I have stopped, and I stopped short. For some reason or another, there are other things in my life that just I've stopped short. For example, like, for years, I wanted to learn how to play the guitar, and Jeremy is like, okay, you just need to drop that dream. but I get it, I've had this car, I ended up giving it, I don't have what it takes to stick with it, and I just, my fingers hurt, and I'm like, I gotta stop. And then, like when I was a kid, my mom made us take piano lessons, and I hated that, but now I wish I could play, and I just stopped. There were things, I've had an unfinished bathroom for years, and finally I had to call Bill Braskett to come fix that for me. So, but I believe, here's the thing, and I think there are certain circumstances in our lives when we choose to stop. We just stop short. For whatever reason, there's a number of different reasons that may play into that. But there are things that I think, and here's what I think. I believe that God can make us promises that we will never possess because we have never learned to persevere. Let me say that again. I believe that God can make us promises that we will never possess because we have never learned to persevere. And I believe that's true in a lot of our, I remember there was a kid in Cheryl's, one of her first classrooms she had when she was in kindergarten, and he was the type of kid that would eat the crayons and the paste and, like, where are your crayons? And he'd be like, I ate them, Literally ate the whole box of crayons. But he had this saying, and for our entire marriage, we've always had something. When something becomes too difficult or too hard, this little kid would say, every time Cheryl asked him to do something in class, and he'd be like, too hard for me. That was all he said. Too hard for me. Too hard for me. And I think sometimes we look at our life and we look at things and circumstances that are taking place in our life, and we just say, it's too hard for me. Too hard for me. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to persevere. And we believe we see that a lot in our areas of our life, like our relationships and our spiritual growth and our businesses and our careers and things that we feel like God has promised to give us, but we just look at it and go, it's too hard. I can't do it. I can't muscle my way through it. I'm going to stop short for some reason or another. And Hebrews chapter 10, verse 36 says this: you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. When you persevere and when you go through the hard, difficult things in life and you persevere through that stuff, you will receive what God has promised. You need to persevere. So this morning I want to start this sermon series called Don't Stop. And I think we have a tendency when we go through our lives and we experience difficulty, we experience challenges or roadblocks or hurdles in our life, we tend to stop. We tend to give up. We need to learn what it means to persevere. And I think even as a church, as individuals, yes, but even as a body of believers, what God is asking us to do as Great Church of the Nazarene. Several weeks ago, I stood up here and talked about Vision Sunday and some of the things that we want to accomplish. And it's easy to get discouraged when you start looking at, how much stuff costs and how much it's going to take to really mentor people and build relationships with people. I shared with you some things that we were trying to do with our building, and we want to continue to, and we're working on that. But we look at that and we go, oh man, that seems impossible. It seems overwhelming. And we look at helping people, and we've worked really hard this year to try to become a church that is outrageously generous and walk with people that have issues and addictions and messed up lives, and try to mentor people and to teach them how to live a better life and teach them what it means to be a Christian and be outrageously generous. And sometimes you look at that and you look at the line item on the budget sheet where it says bread and fish, and that's the money we use to do that stuff, and we see it continually to drop. And we're like, man, it just seems too hard. It's too hard to try to figure it all out. And so this morning I want to speak to you from the 6th chapter of the 6th book of the Bible, which is interesting. It's in Joshua. And so it's the 6th chapter of the 6th book of the Bible. So the title of the message today is Don't Stop on 6. Don't stop on 6, and I'll explain what that means later in my message. But chapter 6 is an interesting passage of Scripture in Joshua, and I want to give you a little bit of background here for those of you that may not be familiar with this story. Chapter 6 in Joshua is really about Joshua and fighting the Battle of Jericho. But I want to give you some background here. The Israelites who had been in slavery in Egypt and had been led out by Moses and had been promised, God had promised them a long time ago that He would give them this promised land. And so the Israelites knew that, and they'd been wandering around the desert for so long waiting for God to give them this promised land. And if you remember the story when they sent scouts in, and Joshua was among one of those scouts to kind of go in, and the 12 guys came back and said, oh man, they're giants there. We can't possibly overtake these people. Along the way, in order to get to the promised land, the Israelites were going to have to battle and overtake some different people. And they looked at, and God had promised to lead them to this promised land of milk and honey. And Moses had died, and Joshua had assumed the position and the role of leading the people to that land that God had promised them. And so that's where we kind of pick up this story. And they finally, after 45 years of walking around in the desert, have come to the place where they get to their first battle, and it's the Battle of Jericho. And we pick it up in chapter 6. But in chapter 6, describes how God's people had to conquer the land that had been granted to them, that had been given to them, that was theirs, but they weren't living there yet. Isn't that interesting? God said, hey, this land, this is your land. It's yours. I'm giving it to you. I'm promising you this land, but the people weren't living in their land. Do you ever get that? And I think sometimes as Christians, that describes us. A lot of Christians live like that. Scripture says that God has blessed us with every spiritual blessing. God has promised that he would meet our needs, but we're still living in the land of the lost. Whatever is in Christ is supposed to be working in my life. Peace in Christ, joy in the Lord, strength of God. It's all supposed to be evident and in possession. So I think God has looked at some of us and said, hey, this is what I've promised you. This is your land, but a lot of us aren't living there yet. We're on the outside looking in. He's promised to do these great things in our life. He's promised each one of us our own individual promised land, but we're not living there yet. We're living on the outside, going, man, that sure would be nice to be living in my ground that God's promised. Let me tell you something this morning. Just because God has promised something doesn't mean that we're going to possess it right now. Do you get that? Just because he's promised to do something for us doesn't mean we have it right this second. We may have to persevere. I want to read the scripture, Joshua chapter 6, verse 1 through 5, and it says this. And we're going to go through a lot of scripture, so bear with me this morning, but we're going to muscle through it. It says this, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horn in the front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. So God was telling Joshua, here's the deal. You're finally going to get in. The time has come. You are finally going to get what I have promised you all these years that you've heard about. The day is today. We're going to make this happen, Joshua. You're finally going to get in. We're going to let you in. But first, you got to do some marching. I love that. You're going to... And what's interesting, you look at that, you look at what God told him. He said, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred, and because of the Israelites, no one went out, no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. I'm going to give you everything. I have delivered this city to you, Joshua. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why people stop short in their life and in our walk with Christ. There's a number of different reasons, but I think the first reason that we stop short is because our perspective gets blocked. Let me tell you what that means. How many of you heard the battle of the song? How many of you were singing the song in your head when Joshua fought the battle of Jericho? Everybody, if you've been around church for like 2 seconds, you've heard there was a little Sunday school song that Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and what happened? And the walls came tumbling down, right? Yeah. Everybody's like, yay, can we sing it? Jeremy, come up. Everybody's really excited about that. But that's just the thing. And here's some background about Jericho. It was kind of interesting. It was the first battle that they came to. After wandering around in the desert, the Israelites came to this battle of Jericho. It was really the first time that they'd faced opposition. They'd prepared for this. They were ready. It was the first battle, but what's interesting is that sometimes getting started is the hardest thing. You ever notice that? Making the decision to start repairing your marriage, or making the decision to get in shape, or following Jesus, or admitting your addiction, or coming clean and saying, hey, I need Jesus in my life, sometimes it's the hardest thing when we fight the first battle. The generation before Joshua didn't have the guts to start. The generation before Joshua said, oh, those guys are too big. We better just hang out here in the desert for a while. We'll get annihilated. They didn't trust God. They didn't have the guts to start. And it's all perspective. I think sometimes we look at someone else's victory, somebody else's life, somebody else's marriage, somebody else's relationship, somebody else's career, and we assume that it was easy for them to get there. Just like that little song, we assumed that was easy. Oh, Joshua fought the battle and the walls came tumbling down. We assumed that was easy for Joshua. Hey, all I got to do is march around and the walls are going to come down, I'm going to walk in. We assumed that was easy. And it's all about perspective. Our perspective gets blocked. Sometimes we look at that and we see, we think, oh, Joshua marched around the city a few times and the walls came down. Not a big city. They estimate actually the city of Jericho was about 6 acres. Could easily walk around it. March around the city in about an hour and a half, maybe, an hour. The walls were 17 feet high. And if we apply that principle to our lives, what are the walls that you're looking at? Some of the stuff that's not happening in your life yet? Some of the stuff that God has promised that you haven't received yet? Some of the stuff that you're intimidated of, some of the stuff that you're keeping you awake at night, some of your poor decisions, whatever it is in your life, I think we look at that and we think, oh, it's too hard. And we look at somebody else and go, man, if I had a marriage like that, if I had a job like that, if I had a house like that, if I had a car like that, if I had kids like that, if I had something else, and we look at somebody else's perspective and we think that it was just easy, that just came easy for somebody. We lose our perspective and so we quit. We stop short of what God has promised to give us. It's not that it's bigger than you or this church because God is in us and He's bigger than anything we could face. It's just that your perspective gets blocked by how high the wall is. You walk around this city and you walk around your obstacle and you look at it and you go, oh my word. How's this ever going to get better? How am I ever going to overcome that? And we look at the wall. I want to say good job for getting to church this morning. And we talk about how important church is. And church lifts your perspective and you get to see beyond the wall of what might seem impossible for us. And church lifts us up. And most of us walk around 6 days a week staring at the wall. 6 days of the week, we leave this place on Sunday and we go right back into the miserable job that we hate. We go right back into the relationships that are broken. We go right back into the struggles that we struggled with yesterday that are there waiting for us on Monday morning. And most of us spend 6 days a week looking at walls and setbacks and deficits and problems with our kids and problems with our finances and problems with our parents and problems with our friends. And we're looking at our problems and that's all we see. We don't have perspective. So church is here. When you come to church, you get to hear about a God who's bigger than all that. Isn't that awesome? And you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with people who are trying to do the same thing as you are and strengthen the relationship with Jesus Christ. Church is a great place. I got to watch Lexi graduate from military. You know, military, they're all about, it was amazing to see one thing when talking to her about how she said, really they had to work together as a unit. If they were going to succeed and get to graduation, the way that is structured, they all have to work with 50, she had to work with 50 other girls that were in her flight. They all had to be in the same step. They all had to be in lockstep with each other. If one failed, they all failed. There's that picture of the church. I had a picture I wanted to throw up. I thought this picture was a good picture. I think our military demonstrates it so well. But sometimes, some of you need a couple of other people to come around and lift you up so you can see over the wall and see what God has promised on the other side. You have to get a boost and look over the wall sometimes to see what God has promised and what He's willing to deliver if we persevere, if we stick it out. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and all of its fighting men." You know what I find interesting about that statement? That only God can speak in the past tense about a battle that you've not even fought yet. Joshua hadn't even fought that battle yet. And it was past tense for God. I've already given it to you. It's a done deal. Before you even start. That's how big God is. That's how confident He is in His ability. He says, you haven't even started the first round, and I've got your back. We have a tendency to live outside the wall. And verse 1 says, I've given you Jericho, and Joshua is saying, nope. If you look at the first verse, it says, the gates of Jericho were securely barred and because of the Israelites, and no one went out and no one came in. And God is telling Joshua, hey, I've given you Jericho. And he's standing there looking at that gate going, I don't think so. I'm not sure how I'm going to get in there. I'm not sure how I'm going to get over that wall. Have you ever felt like what you see in your life or in this church doesn't match up with what God has placed on your heart? You ever felt like that? That God is speaking about victory, but you feel defeated? That God is speaking about healing, but you feel broken? That God is speaking to you about sharing your faith or inviting someone to church, but all you feel is doubt in your ability? That God is speaking about starting to tithe, but you don't see how you could possibly ever make that work in your finances? How God is telling you to put Him first in every aspect of your life, but you're still holding on to priorities? And you're still holding on to things, and you're not putting Him first in your finances, and putting Him first in your family, and putting Him first in your relationships? Have you ever felt like you feel like it just isn't matching up? And I'm telling you, as a situation where your perspective is being blocked by what you see and what you feel, don't let your perspective get blocked. That's why we have church and pastors and staff. We need somebody to give us a boost and look over. So I think the first reason we stop short is our perspective gets blocked. I think the second thing that happens in our life is that our progress isn't always obvious. I want to read another scripture. It's a big passage of scripture, so hang with me. Our progress isn't always obvious. Joshua chapter 6, verse 6 through 14 says this. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed. The armed guard marched around the priests who blew the trumpets. Pay attention to that. The armed guard marched around the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you, then shout. That's really important. We're going to come back to that. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp, spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the trumpets around went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So the second day they marched around the city once and returned to camp. They did this for 6 days. Every day they get up and they march. Every day. Let's get up, march around the city. Let's do some marching. Here's the thing. Our progress isn't always obvious. Don't you love progress? Don't you? One of my absolute favorite things to do in the world is mow the yard. I absolutely love mowing the yard. I don't really like it when Cheryl mows the yard, although I let her this week. It's a special week. But the reason I like to mow the yard is I love to see where I've been. Don't you? Any other yard mowers? Like, I don't know, I like that. I love to see progress, and I love to see the stripes and how they're straight. And I can tell how far I'm getting, and I'm like, okay, I'm about halfway done. And I can look back and I can see, wow, that looks nice. I love to see progress. Mowing the grass, before and after pictures. Don't you love before and after pictures? I love before and after pictures. You can see progress, I shared a picture of Fat Trent a few weeks on Facebook, I love to look back at Fat Trent. And I'm like, man, you were fat. And not spiritually speaking. I mean, like physically, I was fat. But I love to see progress. I think that's why Cheryl loves Fixer Upper. You know, you see the before, you see the after. See progress. We love to see progress. And have you ever noticed have you ever experienced something in your life where you felt like you were putting a ton of effort in? There's nothing more discouraging than that. When you feel like you're putting a ton of effort in and seeing no progress. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever done anything like that? Had something in your life where you're like, man, this is just getting me nowhere. I can't believe, I think so frustrating. I think one time I remember one of the second house we bought was out on Robin Road. Cheryl and I bought this house, and we got a good price for it and everything, but we went in, and we knew it was going to need some remodeling. We were trying to do our own fixer-upper. And we went in, and I kid you not, every wall, absolutely every wall in the house had wallpaper on it. And it wasn't pretty wallpaper. It was like 1968 wallpaper. I'm sure that was good then, but it was just so bad. And they didn't even paint the walls before they put the wallpaper. They just stuck it right to the drywall. That's fun. And so I remember it was a Wednesday night, and even back then, Cheryl was like, I don't know, 2 years pregnant. She was about ready to pop with Morgan, and she's like, hey, it was a Wednesday night, we were doing the youth, and we'd just gotten in, we'd been living in on a piece of foam in our mom and dad's house on the living room floor. That was fun too. But we decided, Wednesday night I had to come to church. We were doing youth back then too, and we said, I'm going to go to youth group, and she's like, I think I'm just going to stay here and try to get some of the wallpaper pulled off. I was like, okay, awesome. And so she's like 8 months pregnant or something like that, and I go to church. I'm gone for an hour and a half, couple hours. I get back home, and she's on a ladder crying. I'm like, what in the world? She's crying. She had worked for a solid 2 hours, and like this much had come off. It was like a 10-inch square of wallpaper. I'm like, you are making some great progress, babe. She's like, it's gonna take forever. Just like she was weeping at the thought of all of this wallpaper. She's like, we're never gonna get moved in here. But there's nothing more frustrating than that. It's to spend time working on something and just feel like this is ridiculous. It's like digging a hole in water. We're not making any progress here. But every day these guys got up and marched. Verse 9, the armed guard, it says, marched ahead of the priest who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed. These guys had been training for years for this battle. They were ready. And I want to just dig into the story of these guys for a minute, what it must have been like feeling for them. Every day, get up, get your battle gear on, kiss the wife goodbye, and head out the front door. Every day they go out and march. And I think if I were God, I would have given them a little bit of something, right? Maybe a brick fall out, kind of like Tetris. I don't know. Every time they make a lap, maybe, a couple bricks fall out, and they're like, hey, we're making some progress. Nope, nothing. Every day they get up, and we got thinking about what that must have been like for them. And day one, here it comes. You come in after your first day, and your wife asks you, "Hey, babe, how'd the fighting go today?" And you're like, "Well, it's just kind of preseason today. We're warming up. We're getting ready. It was just really kind of like preseason. We're just kind of warming up. So we didn't do any fighting today. But I'm sure tomorrow it's going to be better. And it was just kind of like a training exercise today. And so so you go out, you get up the next morning, and you kiss your wife goodbye, and you say, okay, we're going right, and you just march some more. Nobody's talking, just marching. And you come home, and your wife says, hey, how was your day? Which is code from a woman for, ask me how my day was, and sit down, because it's not going to be a short answer. This is going to be a novel. And, right, marriage people. And third day was like, hey, how was your day? And then finally you're getting to a level of frustration. You're getting, you know what? Somebody needs to talk to Joshua, but nobody can say anything because he won't let us speak. He won't let us say anything. He told us not to say anything. Just keep our mouths shut and march. How frustrating. You would have been like, I think he's lost his mind. All we do is get up. And here's the thing. We got to think about why God. there was a theory, I read this theory this week when preparing this message of why Joshua didn't want him to talk. And I think it's because 40 years before, people went into the Jericho and they looked and they said, whoa, man. And Joshua really knew the result of people talking. What happened? They spent 45 years in the desert because people talked. They didn't see the vision. They couldn't grasp what God had for them. He knew that when it comes to receiving God's promise, your mouth is often your worst enemy. Remember in verse 3, when God told Joshua that it was going to be 6 days, he didn't tell everybody else that. These guys just got up and marched. They didn't know if it was going to be 6 days, 7 days, 8 days, 20, 30, 40, 6 months, a year, 2 years. They didn't know how long they were going to be marching. They just got up and marched. They were probably thinking, this guy thinks we're in the marching band. I didn't sign up for the marching band. I want to use my sword. I want to do some battle. But they got up every day and marched. Sometimes we just need to shut up and march. Sometimes we need to stop looking at the wall. We need to stop doubting God. We need to stop doubting what He asks us to do and shut up and march and wait for God's glory to come down and see it firsthand. I don't know if you have any quit in you. We need to believe that God's got this and just shut up and march. Just shut up and do what, I always wanted to say shut up in church. Just shut up and do what God asks us to do. Quit talking about it. Quit saying about how high the wall is. How crazy our leader is. I don't know, maybe some of you think. The third thing is that the process is open-ended. You know, I think one of the things that I've been doing, I got in shape a couple of years ago, and I try to continue to go to the gym. And at first it was fun because, you know, you were losing weight and I could see progress and you could see things happening, and that's good. But then it begins to become more like a chore of this week. It's like, you know, and I know every week I go to the gym, I just have to make myself go there. And they have a clock on the wall. You know, they have this clock on the wall, and I'm like, oh, I've been here for 2 hours. Okay, 10 minutes. I'd like to be in and out in an hour, but I constantly look at the clock, and I just wonder, wouldn't it be nice if God had a clock on the wall of our life? If we knew, you know, if we could look at that and say, well, that's when God's going to step in and make this all great. Because I think if we could see that, it'd be more obtainable, right? It'd be like, you know, hey, I'm going to get married in 2 years. Well, let's bump it up to 3 because that's a Trinity number. But maybe I'm going to get married 3 years, and God has given us that, and maybe you're somebody here that's thinking, I'm never going to get married, I'm never going to find that somebody in my life, and if I could just stay pure until then, you know, if we looked at that, you could say, you know what, I can do that. I can make that a couple years. Maybe if God had that clock on the wall and said, hey, your dream job's going to happen this time next year. This is when it's all going to happen. You'd be like, okay, I can do a year. I can make that work. Maybe here's when you're going to overcome your addiction and it's going to be completely behind you in 3 months. You'd be like, okay, I can make it 3 months. At church, we're going to have all the issues fixed with the air conditioning. It's not going to be hot in here. By this day, you know, you could say, okay, I can suffer through it until September, October, and when it starts to get cooler. We're going to have a well-defined process for our mission team, our revitalization program. It's going to all work right now. We could say, okay, we can make that happen. But I think sometimes God what He promises isn't going to happen right this second. But it will happen. And here's the thing. I'm going to read it again in Joshua 6, 15 through 16. It says, on the seventh day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted. At the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Perhaps God didn't bring down the Jericho a brick at a time because he didn't want the men to trust their own progress. He wanted them to have faith in his promise. He wanted those guys to march around and just have faith. Sometimes God lets you walk around in a situation where what you're doing doesn't seem to be working because he wants you to know that you trust that he's working in your life. That's the essence of faith. Walking around the walls would prepare them to trust God for their future battles. And I wonder if God doesn't send us walking around walls because what he wants to do in us must come before what he wants to do for us. Write that down. That's good. I wonder if God doesn't send us walking around walls because what he wants to do in us must come before what he wants to do for us. And this morning, I just wonder, sitting around this audience this morning, how many people have given up on their marriage, on their kids, on their families, on their dreams, on that one person that you think will never, ever, 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 ever come to Christ? Don't stop on 6, because lap 7 may just be around the corner. Don't stop on lap 6, because you never know what the next lap's going to bring. I want to encourage you this morning, church. I think many churches have given up on reaching lost people, being outrageously generous, accomplishing great things, and taking the city for Jesus. I ask you to stay in this morning. Some of you may be on lap 6 and you don't even know it. So don't stop. Don't stop marching. Some of you have been trying to lead this Christian life, and you've been saying, you know what, Trent, it just doesn't make sense. My life is still a wreck. I've helped several people even this past week that say, you know what, I'm trying to make good decisions, and my life just continually seems to fall apart. Everything continues to go bad for me. Don't stop marching. Don't give up. Don't stop on lap 6, because you never know what lap 7 is going to be like. If we walk every lap like it's your last, believing that God has promised he's right around the corner, one day you'll be right. You will experience the miracle and the glory of God in all its fullness. I want you to bow your head this morning. Heavenly Father, I just thank you for this church. I thank you for your word and what it teaches us. I thank you for this story that sometimes we look at and we read this story and go, well, that's a cool story. That happened pretty easy. But in reality, it took people to persevere. It took people time and energy and effort to trust you. God, I just ask if there's somebody here this morning that's going through a difficult time, God, that they would continue to lean on you and what you've promised. Help them to quit on lap 6. God, for we know that you can do great things in our life. God, I just pray that your hand would fall on this place, and in the stillness of this moment, God, that somebody, if they need to pray, that these altars are open. Maybe it's somebody here this morning that just says, you know what, Trent, I've been wrestling with something. All I see is the wall, and I don't see how to get over it. I don't see what's on the other side. All I can see is the obstacle. God, I just pray that you would just comfort that person right now. Maybe there's somebody here that just, it's difficult for them to get started. And that first battle is always the hardest. And maybe they have been struggling and wrestling with the decision to follow you and to give their life 100% to you and be all in. God, I pray if there's somebody like that this morning, that they would just bow their heads and pray this prayer. Dear Jesus, forgive me of my sins. Come into my life. Take control. Help me to trust you for the promises that you have given me. Help me to know that your will for me is to give me hope and a future and a life full of your grace. God, I just pray if there's somebody like that this morning that prayed that prayer, just lift your hand up so we can pray for you. Anybody this morning? Yep, I see it. Anybody else? Yep, I see it. Anybody else? All right, let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, thank you for these individuals that have prayed that prayer. God, I thank you so much for their life and their willingness to fight the first battle and take the first step. God, thank you for your promises. Thank you for creating an environment where we can trust you, God. Help us to lean on you and trust what you have for us. Thank you for these that are praying here this morning at the altar. God, I just pray that you would meet this need. You know that need more than anybody. God, I'm so grateful for your love and your forgiveness and your challenge for us. God, help us to continue to stay in the fight. Help us to shut up and march and trust that you'll fight our battles for us. God, I pray that you would help people to begin to build relationships in this place and grow groups and in life groups, God, where they can build relationships with people, other people that will walk beside them and that will help boost them up so they can see what's on the other side of the wall. God, I pray for our church so we make decisions to make changes and to do things that are exciting and in a lot of ways scary. God, I just ask that you would help guide us, that we would be a church in Salem that's not about us, but about people that are lost and people that don't know you. Lord, I just thank you so much for your love and your kindness and your spirit here this morning. Thank you for what you've done for us already. Help us to expect what's in lap 7 and help us not to stop this week. Go with us as we leave this place. Let us leave here knowing that we've truly been in the house of the Lord and that we can say, God, this week that we're trusting you and we can experience you. I pray this in your precious holy name. Amen. Thank you for being here this morning. Please respect those that are still praying. You guys have a great week and don't stop.